I am Janis Nark. I retired as a lieutenant colonel in the Army Nurse Corps. I joined the Army in what was called the Army Student Nurse Program. When I was in nursing school, all the recruiters came around from the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and we were impressed. They were all good looking, well traveled in their uniforms, and they promised us everything. We could go wherever we wanted to go, that we'd work in the most modern hospitals with the latest equipment, and everything was going to be rosy. You could go anywhere you want to go. You were guaranteed one of their choices, and they said you can travel, and boy, travel, my ears perked up. I had visions of being the nurse in the dispensary in Garmisch, Germany, skiing the Zugspitze every day and taking care of soldiers who'd gotten frostbite or broken their legs skiing. And they said, oh, of course you can do that. This was 1968. And I'm thinking, there's a war going on and they're not talking about this. And so I raised my hand. I said, excuse me, there's a war going on and you're not talking about this. And they said, oh, no, don't worry. Vietnam, they could barely bring themselves to say the words Vietnam. Strictly voluntary. Even the nurses that want to go can't get there. It's a very choice assignment. And then they said, ladies, there's 3,000 to 4,000 eligible young men for every woman in the military. And I'm thinking, where do I sign? And so I joined on what was called the Army Student Nurse Program, where they paid for my last year of nursing school, and then I only owed them 2 years. I thought, this is a no-lose situation. It's great. It'll get me out of Michigan, and I'll go see the world. It'll be fine. And then I went to basic training, and at the end of basic training, one of our instructors stood in front of us and said, how many of you had recruiters that promised you wouldn't have to go to Vietnam? And in my little class of 30 nurses, 29 of us went. And he said, they lied. They're recruiters. They lie. He says, the truth is, 6 months from now, you will be in Vietnam, or you'll be in Korea, or you'll be someplace so god-awful like Fort Huachuca, Arizona, you'll wish you were in Vietnam or Korea. I looked around at all those shocked and stunned faces, and I just went, he's obviously talking to them, because I'm going to Germany.
Now, did you?
My father had a tool and die factory during the war, so he was exempt. And but all my grandparents, my grandfathers did, and my uncles, they served, but no one in my immediate family. And when I went home to tell them that I was joining the Army, we had a family dinner, and my mother's on one side and my father's on the other, and my brother, 2 years older than me, is sitting across the table. I make this grand announcement, I'm joining the Army. There was a brief silence, and my mother, who was this very supportive woman, said, Janis, I know you've thought this through, and you have a good reason for doing this, and I hope you can tell me what it is. And my father goes, is it money? Do you want money? I'll give you money. And my brother goes, cool, does that mean they're not going to draft me? And that was the entire family reaction in a nutshell. Yeah, I went in basic training. Excuse me, we were all single. I don't think there was anyone who was married, and you couldn't get pregnant. If you got pregnant, you were out of the service, with not even an honorable discharge, a general discharge. So yeah, I was 21 when I went to my first duty station at Madigan General Hospital in Washington State, and I was there for 6 months. I worked first on a medical ward. These guys were all Vietnam vets. They were all teenagers, and they weren't just sick. They were dying. They had been exposed to overlapping tropical diseases, malaria, hepatitis, typhus, jungle rot, fevers of unknown origin, malaria, yellow fever, and they were I remember every color of the rainbow, and the doctors didn't know what to do with them. I mean, they were just poking them, prodding them, taking samples and trying different medications, but it was a grim ward. And thankfully, my time there was short. About a month later, I got transferred to orthopedics. And orthopedics, compared to the medical ward, was almost joyful. These guys, while they had horrible injuries and multiple amputations, gunshot wounds and frag wounds and booby traps, they were injured, but they knew they were home, they knew they were safe, they knew they were going to live, and they were just great with each other and with me, because I'd never seen anything like that. I had 70 patients, and every day we would get busloads of Aerovacs in from Vietnam. Our evacuation system was so good, it wasn't unusual for a patient to be wounded in the field and lose consciousness, to be dusted off by helicopter, taken to the rear, stabilized, sedated, put on a plane, flown across the ocean, put on a bus, brought to my ward, and literally wake up in my hands. I would check them over on their litters before I would assign them a bed. And about once a week, a young soldier would open his eyes and he'd look around, because the last thing he remembered was being shot in the field, wounded in the field. And he'd look up at me with my little white nurse's uniform on that actually had little wings on the sleeves and my white cap. And he'd go, well, I'm either home or I'm dead, because you sure look like an angel to me. And I just go, okay, that's a job perk for sure. And I was there for exactly 6 months, almost to the day, when I got orders to go to Vietnam. I was still 21 years old. I joined the Army with a girlfriend of mine, Omi, Kathleen Rose Omahan, good Catholic girl, and we got sent together. And so we get there, and we landed in Saigon, and we had to somehow find our own way to Tan Son Nhut, to Long Ben. And we got off the plane, and everybody says the same thing. It was the heat and the humidity and the stench of Vietnam. Vietnam had a smell like no place else on earth. And we fortunately had met some young men who were couriers in the Army before they went over, before we did. So they met us, and I said, I'm sure they're going to send somebody to take us to Long Ben. And he goes, I don't think so. He says, no, they don't do that. And I just went, really? So we stayed in Saigon for a day or two, and before they took us to where we were supposed to in-process in Long Ben. And we get there, and we're in these old wooden barracks, and they issued us our fatigues and combat boots and new dog tags. And I just remember the heat. I mean, it was just stifling, and the mosquitoes. And we stayed in these barracks, and there's there's a war going on around us. We can hear it. And I wrote in my diary, I said, I'm fighting my own war in here with the mosquitoes, and I'm losing. And then the next day, we got separated. She was stationed in Long Ben, and I got sent to Cam Ranh Bay. And I remember walking through the emergency room with her, and there were patients on all the tables, blood and bandages and people yelling and screaming, and somebody says, Lieutenant, your ride's here. And my ride was the helicopter that had just dropped these guys off. And so this, I had to run and get on the helicopter, and I'm waving goodbye as, we pick up like this, and then we start going, and I'm waving goodbye to Omi, and there was blood all over the floor. And I'm thinking, my life is about to change dramatically.